If you suddenly had enough money to cover your living expenses, would you keep working? The journey to financial independence includes creating alternative income sources. With enough secondary income coming in, you might find you have the option to leave work earlier than you had planned. For many, real estate is the secret. But getting started in real estate can be intimidating. Yet, real estate can create true passive income. Today, on Escape the Clock, I have an expert joining who accomplished doing just this. The author of the book, The Wealth Elevator, is here, and he's going to explain how he was able to build enough passive income in real estate to achieve financial freedom. Stay tuned. Hey, y'all, you're listening to Escape the Clock, the podcast where I, the author of the book, break down how you can achieve financial freedom and have the option not to work. Financial freedom means having cash flow to cover all your needs, and many people save in accounts hoping that withdrawals will last. With passive income, money keeps flowing even after your last paycheck. And as I've said before, for me and many others, hitting passive income goals means not just having freedom from work, but a strong peace of mind that everything's going to be okay. But how do you get to that? How do you have enough passive income to feel that way? There are actually many options, but what we really need is a playbook. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. Today's guest is Lane Kawaoka. He's the two-time best-selling author of The Wealth Elevator. After 12 years as a civil and industrial engineer, Lane left the 9 to 5 to focus full-time on real estate investing. He started with single-family rentals, and he now invests in syndications across multifamily, RV parks, mobile homes, assisted living facilities. And Lane's mission is to help everyday people access investment opportunities once reserved for the wealthy and build real estate portfolios for financial freedom. Welcome to the podcast, Lane.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Aloha, everybody out there.
Lane, before you wrote The Wealth Elevator, you started investing in your early 20s in Seattle. Can you tell us a little bit about that first deal and what it taught you about building wealth?
Yeah, so that was the aha moment. I bought a house to live in because, again, up until this time, I was on this linear path of go to school, study hard, get an engineering job. Part of that is do the 401k, get the company match, and buy a house to live in, right? So you can eventually have a family in it. I was lucky enough to expedite through that pretty quickly, saved up 80 grand to buy a house to live in. Luckily, I didn't have a family, so I had a lot of freedom. And my job at the time allowed me to just live off company expenses. And so I hopped from hotel to hotel, as a construction supervisor. So I just rented the damn thing out. And back then it was in my early 20s, and that was a lot of beer money at the time. I think the monthly rents were 2,200 a month, and the mortgage was 1,600. So I didn't know anything about rent to value ratio, 50% rule. And maybe we can kind of talk about those things, but I was just like, "Whoa, this is cool, right?" And then I started to realize, like, wait a minute, if it didn't take me too long to save 80 grand for a down payment, if I just kept doing this again and again, I would be able to escape the rat race. So yeah, that's where it all started, right? Sort of accidental landlord.
That's awesome. So it sounds like that first experience that you had then was really setting the stage for you. And in your book, The Wealth Elevator, you make this comparison to riding an elevator, where like each floor is representing a different stage of wealth that you're building and throughout your life. How did you come up with that metaphor, and why do you think that resonates so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to write a book mainly for accredited investors or people at the very least kind of starting where I did, right? You got a professional salary, you're not broke, you're not horrible with your finances. The $5 latte trick ain't gonna cut it for you. So again, I just, everything I talk about, I just try and speak from experience. And, that was my life. I kind of stood on that first floor of the wealth elevator where you're not yet $1 million net worth or greater or a credit investor. And the name of the game is just buying little rental properties. And that's exactly what I did back then.
Yeah, that's great. I've actually met with folks who have done similar. So, and I know there's lots of different ways you can kind of make your way. And I know this is a really tried and true technique. But let's go through the journey a little bit for anyone who's not really familiar with it. starting with the bottom. So you talk about the basement as the first floor. And today, nearly 60% of Americans don't even have enough in savings to cover $1,000 emergency. This is just a fact. It can be very difficult. But for someone who does have limited capital, what is the single most important first step that you would say that they should begin to take to begin moving up the elevator?
Well, if you don't have that much capital, or you don't make more than $50,000 a year at a professional job, I mean, you probably shouldn't listen to me and probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast, right? But that said, there are a lot of books with financial tips like the Dave Ramsey, Caesar Ormans. I think they're great ideas, great people. They're just kind of made for the masses out there. Again, people under $100,000, $250,000 net worth, possibly in credit card debt. Like that is the majority of people out there. Like you said, I've had some articles or videos I've done where I kind of take an approach of, buying a house to live in may not be the right thing for most of us, on the wealth elevator. But for most people out there, they need like a forced piggy bank to put their money to. If not, they're gonna spend it on willy-nilly something, right? So that mortgage becomes that forced payment plan or that forced piggy bank. So for the majority of Americans out there, yes, buying a house to live in makes a lot of sense. But if you are kind of on the other side of the coin, it probably makes sense to get on the offense and put your money to a higher ROI. And that was the big thing initially when I first had that rental property, and I broke down all the ways you make money with real estate. And I know you've done real estate yourself, and I'm sure you had the same epiphany. I think the acronym is like IDEAL. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically, you make money four amazing ways with real estate: the tax benefits, mortgage pay down, cash flow. Can't remember the fourth one, but when you add all those up, I have a video where I just do the math, right? Because I'm an engineer too, right? And because I had to talk myself into it, right? When you're a rental property owner, you only see the cash flow, which is only like the tip of the iceberg in a way. And when I added all these ways I was making money, a few of them hidden ways just on paper, um, I was making like 20-30% plus on my money. And mind you, like I don't do any of this wholesaling or flipping stuff. To me, that's what people do when they're in the basement level of the wealth elevator. They're more active investors. I'm more passive, buy and hold. But this is where I realized, like, wait a minute, why would I want to put my money in the 401k stuff? And that was the chip of the armor. Like that was where like the Wizard of Oz, like the man behind the curtain, don't pay no attention to the man, right? Like just invest in what they all want you to do. The Vanguard guy comes to the office, tells everybody they should dump their money in the 401k, or the certified financial planners. Why? Because that's how they get paid, right? They make money when you invest to those retail investments. And that was kind of where I realized, wow, there's something else out there.
Yeah, definitely a fan of the passive route, like trying to get to the point where you can have passive income doing the work because then you're truly free. I agree with that a lot. I think for this first floor, I'm wondering though, like someone who, as long as they have income, like what can they do to really get their lives in order? And I agree, like jumping right into real estate before you have everything else in order, probably not the best thing, especially if you borrowing with leverage and things like that, could get in trouble. But getting debt in order. You mentioned Dave Ramsey. I know there's a lot of debt, relief and reduction focus there, budgeting, things like that. Do you think like that's mostly trying to sort out like where you are, get your cash flow in a good place, and then start to consider real estate as a potential option towards your passive income? Or are you saying like that's not necessarily for everyone? Maybe there's another better option for some others in those
Yeah,
situations.
I mean, I certainly don't think real estate is for everyone, especially on the first floor where you actually have to get a property manager, get them in order, right? Pick a property. Like, investing is not for everybody. There is always risk in investment, and most people out there just can't stomach it, right? So I get it, right? Like, financial independence is not for everybody. And that's why it's for those of us who can kind of push through, surround yourself with a community. We do retreats and stuff like that with our folks. Um, you can safely get off the beaten path into this world. But for some people who are already accredited investors, they make over $200,000 a year. Maybe they're a dentist, doctor, or an engineer. Or a lot of my investors are, most of my investors are guys in their 50s and 60s, and they've built that nest egg, so they are an accredited investor already. But like the first floor of the wealth elevator, like I think the big prerequisite, and I think it's in that chart in the book. I think it's in there, but now just talking, like the big prerequisite is like, after, you do your budget, you see how much income you make and your expenses, obviously. But if you can save like even 5, 10 grand per year, I think you're there. You're there because you do 5, 10 grand a year in 3 years, you can save up for a 20, $30,000 down payment on a little $100,000 rental property, and you're off and moving.
Yeah, that's great because like I want that's why I want to see where this could go next, right? Because for those that do have some capital, right, and studies have showed that over 90% of millionaires own real estate. So I'm not saying I don't think it's necessarily real estate makes millionaires, but there's a correlation between real estate, millionaires having owned real estate, likely because they have the capital, right, to be able to put into that. But what would you say to someone who's like, okay, I have capital. I'm interested in making sure I'm at least working my way up a little bit and I want that passive income. What is kind of the first move you would tell them they need to do to start getting on that journey?
Well, I think the thing about like business owners and people who get past this, what people don't realize, the first 100,000 to first million or $2 million, that's the hardest part to break through. You know, i- if yeah, you have a business which is very risky. Every business is risky. All of them. A lot of them go out of business all the time. You never hear about them, but you can break through that pretty easily. But if you're kind of constrained to $100,000 a year, even $500,000 a year in terms of salary, it's going to be very hard to get through there without the use of healthy leverage, right? And leverage is what I mean, debt, take out loans. And I think this totally flies in the face of what they teach people on the basement level, right? Never go into debt. That is sin. And then they associate all these like passages with not doing that. Um, what I'm saying here is you have to get past the sticking point, to even get past 8 figures. You have to use leverage in a healthy way to get past that. And if you're going to do it, you might as well use a very strong asset such as real estate, which is why banks give you such damn good leverage when you do it, because they understand the validity of real estate. And from an investor point of view, like my investment thesis is I like investing in things that cater towards the middle America, lower middle class, or what people call workforce housing. I think it's the glut of the American population. I also think that there's a good thing that we provide that type of housing. We're not slumlords, but it's not like super high end stuff like luxury properties, right? We're talking about bread and butter, things that rent between $900 to $1,200 a month. Now, if you live in California, you probably think that that's, whoa, what's that? But that's the majority of Americans out there.
Yeah, yeah, I'm from the Midwest. The sticker shock of moving to the West Coast what really surprised me how the real estate market's so different. But I can say, like, for my journey, I know what made me most comfortable was just starting with my primary residence, just paying that off, having that leverage, being able to do something as simple as like a home equity line of credit, just to be able to do some level of borrowing where I felt, comfortable to get started. Is that kind of a route that you see could work more for people, or are you thinking it's more of okay, you're getting yourself organized, wherever the capital is, or whatever borrowing you need to do, that's fine. You just need to do the research and just feel like you have to take a chance at it.
Yeah, I mean it's a very common way for people to kind of get off the side of the pool, right? Everything has risks, obviously. I'm not getting any financial, legal, or tax advice here. I get that out of the way. But yeah, like the problem when a lot of people have this idea like I'm gonna buy my house to live in and pay it down, or maybe you can get a rental property, right? The problem with that, as the property appreciates and you pay down your mortgage, your equity position increases, which is good, right? But your return on equity goes way, way down, right? So when you are, when you first bought your house, right, or if you first bought your rental property, you probably got like an 80% loan to value loan on that. You were leveraged, and your return on equity was pretty good, right? Maybe 15, maybe even 30%, right? Some of these things. But as you start to pay down the property, return on equity, or for those math people out there, the denominator gets really big. So this drives this down a lot. So if you kind of think of like a C curve in terms of a graph, I know it's a lot of time since college or high school, but your return on equity goes way down. So like like I actually rent for my primary residence. I think I don't want to sink down 200, 300 grand on a down payment. I'd rather have that working for me in deals. But if you think about it, like the person I was renting from, they had $1 million house. It was all paid off. I was paying maybe like 3 grand a month, and assuming there's no expenses, right? Because I'm a perfect. I think I'm a pretty good tenant, right? I'm pretty reasonable. I change my own light bulbs, but they, let's say they were profiting 20 grand after all expenses, which is, I think, pretty generous. Probably much worse than that. But they're making 20 grand on $1 million. That's 2 freaking percent.
Yeah,
That
compared
is
to returns
hor
you might get in other markets and
It
things that
is
are much
horrible,
higher.
absolutely
Yeah.
horrible, and for taking on all that risk of being a landlord. So that's obviously an extreme example, but that just illustrates how you go from 15, 30% and it trails down to that number. Um, there, and this is the thing, there's no hard and fast rule here. At some point it makes sense for you to take the money out, re-leverage it, whether to sell the asset, cash out, refinance, 1031 exchange, which I'm not a huge fan of. I've done a few of them personally, but you get that money re-leveraged and working for you, ideally in things like cash flow. But as I've started to personally learn what wealthy people do, that may or may not be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know some people want to be in real estate, but they don't want to go through all that or take that risk or feel like they're having those losses, like kind of you described. And they might look to like real estate trust or REIT or something like that. But I know, like in your book, you talked a lot about real estate syndications, especially when you're kind of working your way up and scaling. And I think like back in 2022, it it was over like 120 billion dollars in transactions in real estate syndications in the country. Like that's huge. And for investors who may be unfamiliar, can you maybe describe what a syndication is and how you see that as something that can help someone accelerate their path to where you got to, where you actually have the passive income that you're able to live off of?
Yeah, so what a real estate syndication is, the analogy that I like to use is like an airplane. Airplane, you've got the cockpit where you have the people flying the airplane. Sometimes there's one person, bigger airplane, you've got a few people or a handful of people. Those are in a deal, those are their general partners, sponsors, operators, different names for kind of the same position. But these are the guys who put the debt in their own name. They also take on the legal liability, right? Slip, trips, or falls, etc. And then the passive investors are kind of the people who come and coach, and they invest the money, a lot of times 50,000, $100,000 minimums, and then they kind of go to sleep and take a nap, right? They have no operational responsibilities. And also, more importantly, from the legal front, like when I had 11 properties in 2015, I found a lot of investors, as I started to interact with other accredited, seemingly wealthy people, were getting more involved in these types of opportunities as a passive investor and getting rid of their little rental properties. Like, don't get me wrong, they were great at the time. And if you're under $1 million, $500,000 net worth, consider buying a rental property. I have a lot of free e-courses for those people on my website to do that. But after a certain point, certainly when you become a millionaire, you are a much a higher target to being sued. Nobody really wants to sue a guy who has, when I was in my 20s and I had $250,000 net worth, barely anything to get at, right? It's not worth it. But when you get to those levels, that's when you break. In the book, we talk about the first floor to the second floor of the wealth elevator kind of precipice. But going back to you mentioning earlier, the REITs, these things invest in the same things, right? A lot of times it's the same, same buildings, right? The syndications will buy a 200 unit apartment complex here, or REIT will buy a 200 unit apartment complex here, or a commercial property. They're investing in the same thing, but it's a huge difference in terms of the REIT is a retail product where you have so many middlemen in there taking all your money, where the syndication is pretty much the purest form, the investing direct is the term into the deal. And so you're cutting out in the minute. And this is what frustrated me so much. Like my parents don't even realize that them investing in the 401k stuff, they're just making Wall Street rich. Like how else will Wall Street have all these big buildings, right? Or the nice guy who's a financial planner, right? What does he know? He's just getting paid commissions, and he's just one part of this whole in investment investment complex. So that's the key there. It's not only in real estate where you get tax benefits, cash flow, and it's a hard asset, but it's the fact that you're investing directly into it is the key.
Yeah, what I really impressed me about the real estate syndicates is syndications is that you have someone promoting the property. They've done the research, they found the lead in a way, and they understand the potential returns of the investment, and then others have the opportunity to put the capital up and have put their stake in there without having to do all that legwork and effort. There's no guarantee of return, but if it's is credible and there's a return, then you really done well without having to go and be understand the market, find the leads, be there at day one. So I do really think that's a if anyone's not familiar with it, maybe check out the book or check your videos to see more about that because I do think that is a really intriguing strategy if someone's trying to build that kind of thing into their plan. Let me ask you though more about the goal is to kind of really work your way up, right? And like you talk about like the rooftop is like kind of the real goal, right? Is to get to the very top. But before there's the penthouse. And when you talk about this idea, and you mentioned 401ks a few times, so I kind of want to get your thoughts on this in more detail. But 21% of workers right now feel that confident that they'll have enough to retire comfortably. Only 21%. So not a lot of people feel like they're going to be able to retire at whatever age they decide to retire, 65, 67. So in your mind, how does an investor know that they're truly ready, that they've worked themselves up to this penthouse level and that they can stop with their job because all that active stuff they've do to get income is now truly sustained on passive income? What is in your mind, what is the real strategy or how do you even know you're there?
Last your net worth past 5 to 10 million. That's the only way you know for sure. Um, but I think I'll introduce like this concept of accumulation theory. Like that's what most traditional investment philosophy is based off, right? Like just save your money blindly in the 401k stuff, right? Or all these mutual funds, etc. And build your nest egg to a certain point where you can withdraw it at a 4% rule. Right? It's typically, if you were to pass that on to your kids who's a bonehead, and we talk about this a lot in our group, is like, we work so hard, it's the kids that usually blow it, right? Because they're just not really interested in it.
Generational
But
legacies don't wax. So usually by the third generation, the wealth is gone. Yeah.
yeah, 90% of it's gone. But at least we work with mostly first generation multimillionaires, so the people who made the wealth. But when you look at it from that perspective, you want to accumulate the money, this pile of money, where to me, let's begin with the end in mind. What is the goal when you supposedly hit retirement, whether that's 70 years old, or I know you've kind of done it earlier, right? Um, at this point, it's more about a cash flow stream, right? You wanna power your monthly expenses, whether that's $5,000. Most of our clients, they're around $10,000 to $20,000 a month.
Yeah.
So you divide that. I think the multiplier is like divided by 20, but like you want to create that monthly cash flow stream. And how are you going to do that? Well, you have to have your money in the right investments that create cash flow for you. Now, sophisticated investors are able to convert cash flow into lump sum to cash flow, right? But we're not really getting into that now. But for a very basic, for newer investors, that's the idea. Is like instead of this accumulation, build a pile, you want to begin with the end in mind, create mini streams of income. And that's where the idea of buying little rental properties. So you basically build little mini streams of income and you can kind of build that on top of it. So you can titrate into this, whether your monthly nut is 8 grand a month or 13 grand a month, you can get into there smoothly. And what's super cool is, I mean, this is basically my claim to fame. Like for a while there, I was had a huge surplus where I was able to, maybe buy another two rentals every single year, which added another $400 of passive cash flow a month, or 4 or 5 grand per year, right? Like it just gets getting bigger and bigger, and I can kind of land on Mars as Mars is moving in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked about this a lot, I think, on the show about the compounding rates of strategies. Like we have to think about being able to get to that compounding returns because it's hard in the beginning. You actually mentioned that earlier. I know, like for me, a lot of my 20 years I was working was just to get to that first million. That was really hard. It takes a lot longer to get that, but then after that, the type of return you can get on that is exponential right after that. So it sounds like in your case, really doing it successfully with real estate, buying that first property or second property might be a little painful. It might take, a little time, but you can get to the point where not only are you generating more cash flow and capital for yourself, but passive income to the point where, like you said, you have enough to cover your costs for the remainder of your time. Then you're at your penthouse level. So did I generally get that right?
Yeah, I mean, just using my numbers, right? Like I bought my when I graduated college, I had really no money. I had a little student loans, but knocked that out pretty quickly. And 2 years out of college, I bought a house to live in, started renting that out. But it took me, my next property was a duplex in Seattle. It took me 2 or 3 years to save up for that next one, right? Like, so this is like watching grass grow. But then that was what, 2011, 12, I'm guessing. But then by 2015, I had 11 rentals, right? So, and then yeah, then we get involved in syndication, private placements, and the numbers just skyrocket from there. But that's the hockey stick that we all talk about. But during that time, those first formable years from 2009 to 2015, I was for a few years there, I was saving 100 grand. And I was dumping all that into rental properties. And that may not be you. You may not have the capacity for that. I know some of our investors, like the doctors, they're able to save 100, 200 grand a year, and that's great. But if most of our clients, even on the low end, they're saving 25, 50 grand per year. That's not too shabby right there.
That's great. Let me ask you one more question then. Like, let's assume you do well, you get there, and you talk about the rooftop being where you're building your legacy. And I'm really interested in this because you get to the point you've done all this work, you've accumulated. How do you protect it? And like, I know like a lot of people, generational wealth is difficult. A lot of, 70% of it gone by the next generation, 90% by the third. How do you see that? What are people you're telling your clients they need to do to protect their wealth and make sure their legacy lasts?
Yeah, well, from the pragmatic legal side, black and white side, again, I'm not a lawyer, right? But if anybody needs any referrals, let me know. But when you're under a million, maybe a couple of $1 million net worth, the LLCs are great, entities. But when you get past that threshold, certainly 4 or 5 million and greater, right? Like we all use these more advanced irrevocable trusts, things like that, a lot more exotic. May not, if you're not in a high liability profession, you probably don't need like an offshore trust, things like that. But these are the things that the wealthy are doing that I had no concept over until I got into this world. Obviously, this is what we talk about a little bit in the third floor penthouse level of the wealth elevator, which is good to have some exposure into. But again, that wasn't legal advice. But I'm just saying, but as far as like how do you keep this going for multi-generation and more? Like to me, I think it's like you are the 5 people you hang out with most. Like if you do not have 5 people who are accredited investors that made it themselves, like you need to find those people. And that's what we provide within our community. That and a lot of times these guys are definitely not doing the 401k max out thing. That's just not how they get there. Um, yeah, and that's I think it's peer group, big thing.
Yeah, that's great. Protecting yourselves, there's steps you can do to protect yourself, but education, I always say, is critical. You have to You have to be curious. You have to learn from others who've done things, and you have to then put that in your plan. So, thank you so much, Lane. This was awesome. Your insights are great. How can listeners find out more about you and connect with you and your book?
Yeah, they can check out my book, The Wealth Elevator. We got the cool flip chart in there, table. I always say the first step is the self-awareness check. Where are you right now? If you're an accredited investor, feel free to shoot me an email, lane at thewealthelevator.com. We can jump on a free consult. And if you're not quite a accredited investor, maybe check out some of the free courses we have. I think that they're on thewealthelevator.com/turnkey. I still think buying little rental properties, especially remotely, if you live in high-priced areas, is kind of the way to get into this game. It's going to take a while, though, right? Not a get-rich-quick scheme for sure, but that's the way to get started. But the first step is figure out where you are. If you buy the book on Amazon, I know you did. Thanks for doing that. If you send me the receipt, we can hook you guys up with the PDF version and the MP3 version if you're like me, who's not the best reader, better at listening things while I'm doing chores. But you email that team at thewealthelevator.com and we'll hook you guys up there.
That's awesome. Thank you again so much, Lane. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah.
Wealth wasn't handed to me, but through hard work and strategic planning, I've been able to build generational wealth, just like Lane. Personally, I really enjoyed hearing about his early epiphanies and how they shaped the way he approached life and investing. And Lane's perspective on investing in real estate instead of sticking to solely the traditional paths, I found that quite refreshing. Personally, I followed a more conventional path: save what you can, take the 401k match, avoid debt, invest through big name broker, things like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It works for many people. But Lane's journey, climbing the elevator to the roof, becoming a multimillionaire, and letting his portfolio generate cash passively while protecting it for future generations, I found it truly inspiring. And so whether you're taking the traditional route or the elevator, I hope you find inspiration to put your capital where you'll get your best return. If real estate's your path, remember Lane's advice. Start small, work your way up, and eventually explore syndications and larger deals. With time and strategy, you can bring on property managers, turn active investments into passive income, and step into the penthouse to enjoy the view. And before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. Where are you on your wealth elevator? And what are you going to do to work your way up? Leave your answer on the page or email me at escapetheclockmedia@gmail.com. Your answer may be featured in a future episode. Best of luck riding the elevator and escaping the clock. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember, while I'm not yet a financial planner, I am getting my degree in wealth management. You should take anything you've heard here as tips and advice to making your plan. To learn more, visit www.escapetheclock.com. There, you can find the book, resources, including the planner, and you can even schedule time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.